My field placement for this year was in a 5th grade class at Cole Academy, a charter school in Lansing. Prior to TE 405, I had a love for writing and knew it was very important, but I did not know much about teaching it. I previously believed that students should practice different styles of writing because they will need to use these skills in the future, but I did not really consider the idea of choice. I now believe that if students are allowed to choose what they write about, they will be more motivated to write and create interesting and unique pieces, as well as enhance their skills as a writer. Throughout the year, I learned about my students as writers by observing the lessons my mentor teacher taught and the writing process the students went through. Some of them would read their stories to me and tell me about the different features they had in their writing. It was also important for me to get to know my students because background knowledge is an essential part of writing and important to consider. My mentor teacher uses the Writer's Workshop method often, so I was able to observe this in action before attempting to teach a writing lesson myself, which was incredibly helpful. A typical day of writing instruction would be based around the model on page 11 of Fletcher and Portaluppi's writing workshop. 5 to 10 minutes are devoted to a mini lesson in which I would teach a focused topic based on the standards to the students, which they could use in moving forward with their writing. After this small lesson, the students would then be given a 35 to 45 minutes for writing, which is the bulk of the lesson and very important. The students will work on what they choose to write about during this time and are encouraged to incorporate ideas from the lesson taught prior to their writing time. Next, the lesson would conclude with about 10 to 20 minutes of share time, in which either students will conference with each other or I will conference with students. There will also be time for whole group sharing. It is important to encourage students to give constructive feedback that builds the writer up rather than tearing him or her down. Also, my conferences would be driven by the student and the writing he or she has already created, and we would make a plan for the next writing steps together. During the mini lesson, the class will gather together in a large space, ideally on a rug area. This area could also later serve as a comfortable space for some students to write in, or where I could work with individual students or groups. My students will design their writer's notebooks to match their personalities and get them excited about the writing process. While they are writing, I will also write to model my expectations and show them that I take this seriously as well. Students will be spread all over the room during the writing time and can sit in places that make them feel comfortable, even if this means they are not at their desks. I can play relaxing music to help create a safe and comfortable atmosphere for my students to write. When I taught my Writer's Workshop lesson, my teaching point was that good writers of poetry use precise language and pick their words carefully so they can get the message across in just a few lines. The lesson I taught serves as a good example of how I would want my future writing workshop lessons to go. I gave the students a mini lesson with an anchor chart, and we worked together to add to it so the student could make the most of the chart and see their ideas on it. The anchor chart contained an example, which they were able to refer back to during their own writing. After the mini lesson, I gave them plenty of time to write, during which time I also wrote a poem while utilizing the teaching point. In this case, I only worked with a small group, so we shared out the poems we created together and were able to give constructive criticisms as a group. In the future, I will make sure to use the Writer's Workshop to encourage my students to learn new skills while still having the choices in writing they make. This is not only an effective method of teaching, but is also one that I notice students enjoy, and it creates a love of writing, which is so important for students to have. I will continue to write along with my students so they can have a positive role model in their life, showing them that it is a lifelong process. Finally, I will make sure that I continue developing as a teacher of writing and work to make sure every single student's individual writing needs are being met.